Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to Boxing Unwrapped. Welcome to this week's Boxing Unwrapped. I'm Ryan.
I'm Andrew.
And guys, we have a super special episode for you as always. Just a reminder, guys, please make sure that you subscribe or like the Facebook page. Also, leave us a review. A couple of you did it last week. Really appreciate it. But we need many more reviews to try and get people onto the Boxing Unwrapped train. But Andy, do you want to tell the people what we've got in store for them this week?
Yeah, so the main focus of the episode this week will be what the F turned a boxer into a serial killer. And we'll go into this a bit more. There's obviously one spectacular example of this, and we're going to delve a bit more broadly into the boxers as both proponents and victims of the odd murder and see what crops up. And we can also have a look at it and see how it compares against people in other sports as well. So boxing and murdering is the main theme of the episode. I don't know why we came up with this, Ryan.
Fucking warped as fuck.
It's like one of the old school, one of our old days episodes, I think. We'll look at what the F are the results from last week, and there's a few things to go over there. What the F are the fights coming up this weekend? Probably not as exciting, but there's a few things to flag. What the F went wrong last week? A little bit. And I've got a fair chunk of random news to go over as well. And then, of course, everyone's favourite section, what grinds my gears.
Nice. Well, with that, let's jump into our main topic of the week. What the F turned a boxer into a serial killer?
It's very odd, isn't it? It sounds odd to say.
It does indeed.
And it's obviously quite an odd topic, really, to get into. So I suppose for anyone that's not picked up on it, we're referring to the sort of the spectacular confession of a Mr. Samuel Little in America who proclaimed to be a boxer and has confessed to killing over the years 90 people, which would make him the worst serial killer in US history.
Yeah, killing people up and down the US from 1970 to 2005. That is...
Maybe he had pin... You know how when you go to a country, you have a map on the wall, and then when you go to a country, you put a pin in it? Maybe he was doing that with states and murdering people.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they've linked him to at least 34, right? And he's confessed to a whole bunch of other ones. I don't know if he's doing this thing where you know how some serial killers, just to go wild, they just confess to every fucking killing that they possibly could do. But I think he had a pretty interesting background when he was born. So he was born June 7th, 1940 in Georgia. And they say it was possibly during one of his mother's prison stints because his mother was a prostitute.
It's a strong start, isn't it? It's a strong start to kick things off.
Really. Rarely does a millionaire's life story begin with he was born during one of his mother's prison stints because she was a prostitute. Do you know what I mean? It's just not the way these things usually go. They don't go well, do they? He had lots of problems at school. When he was in high school, he was arrested for the first time for breaking and entering. Then he went to juvenile offenders. He worked as an ambulance attendant, then a cemetery worker. Now, a cemetery worker, no offense to cemetery workers, right? But if someone's going to be a killer, you kind of imagine them being a cemetery killer, don't you?
A cemetery worker, yeah. Well, better that than an ambulance attendant. I'm not sure quite what an ambulance attendant does.
Maybe he went all Harold Shipman, and that's part of his killing sprees. He just turned up and did nothing.
A really subtle to start with.
Yeah, totally.
But, I mean, it's so it couldn't be any more classic, could it? If you were doing a cliche of what someone that will end up being a serial killer, what their background and their upbringing and their adult life will look like, it would be like this. It would be broken home, criminality, sort of in and out of juvenile and then jail, escalating levels of criminality or escalating severity of offence, etc., etc. I mean, it's cliched, isn't it, in terms of like how kind of quintessentially like it is. It's exactly how you'd expect.
Totally. And like the interesting thing, well, not interesting, but like the way in which he tended to kill people, right? And his targets were always women. He'd give them a knockout punch and then proceed to strangle them while masturbating, then dump the bodies and leave town. Right?
I don't want to be crude at this point, Ryan.
But you're gonna be.
No, but like, so he's doing both things one-handed.
Yeah, totally. The guy must be fairly dexterous, I guess. But like, if you're like a proper Freudian, you'd go into this and be like, this absolutely has like deep rooted upset at his mother, and that's why he does this.
I'm absolutely certain. Yeah, I'm sure the sort of psychoanalysis would definitely lay the blame for this on the mother. Yeah.
Now, if dear listeners, if you go and Google this guy Samuel Little, every news article will come up and tell you that he is a boxer and he's a serial killer, right? Now, if you then go on to BoxRec and put this guy's details in, there's no fucking boxer that was a professional boxer at any time called Samuel Little.
Yeah, that's the thing. It seems that he took up boxing, but I think it's just something to like. It's just like a hook, isn't it?
100%.
If you excuse the pun, I didn't actually mean that. But yeah, it's like just to sort of give him a label. If you just say, guy who was like a kind of career criminal with a really bad upbringing and in and out of detention and prison and stuff, then was a serial killer. It's not nearly as interesting or as snappy as saying boxer turned serial killer, but it's not portraying it accurately to call him, because he's not really a boxer. So we've kind of invalidated this whole episode, Ryan.
A little bit. I mean, he took up boxing during prison, during one of his stints. And then he considered himself a prize fighter at one point. And he has said this in a few interviews that he was a boxer, blah, blah, blah. And maybe this kind of self identification as a boxer, feeds into his kind of warped sense of violence.
You would suggest as well that practically then having the training to be able to deliver to punch properly, although I know he was quite like a kind of strong man, and he's preying on prostitutes and drug addict women, then even accounting for that, the fact that he can deliver these sort of stun punches is a kind of it's enabling it, so that the violence, I guess, is a bit normalized for him, and also he's then got a relatively he can be confident in his work in terms of being able to kind of to knock the people out kind of quickly so that he can do the murders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I found interesting about it as well is it was really DNA technology that meant this guy got caught, because they're now able to use DNA testing and tie it up with cold cases and go, oh right, okay, this man's sperm was all over this woman, when he was found.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the map, it's from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., down to Houston, New Orleans, Miami, Las Vegas, Albuquerque. The guy it was like he was trying to collect all 50 states.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? So there are a few tragedies, obviously. The whole thing's tragic, really. But so he was arrested, first of all, for a murder in 1982. The grand jury acquitted him all.
Yeah.
So the tragedy is obviously that there was opportunity for so many of the lives to have been saved. He was acquitted again, was he not? Or
he was acquitted again, and then he was actually tested for an involvement of 60 murders of women committed in many United States, but it has to do with they didn't quite have all the evidence, and then they let him go. And then it's now, because of DNA, they were able to establish that he was involved in these murders.
So that's obviously a real tragedy regarding it. So when he was already serving a life sentence, it's worth bearing in mind, I think he's 78 now. He was serving a life sentence for 3 of the murders, and then he's obviously chosen to confess to however many dozens more. There's a couple of things that I found interesting about it. So one of the things is that apparently he confessed, and like you said, that 34 of them, they've been able to kind of credibly verify the confession with details that were not public, to therefore say that yes, it's very likely that he did them. And obviously for closure for families, etc., if there are them involved, then that's obviously helpful. I mean, practically it doesn't make any difference whether he gets convicted of any more murders in terms of like, he's still going to die in prison, but it's about justice being served. So one of the reasons apparently that he confessed actually to the murders was so that he used it as bargaining to get moved prison.
Seriously?
Yeah. So I think he wanted out of the specific prison that he was in, and he said, well, I'll confess to a few more murders if you move me.
Fucking hell, man.
But I heard of other situations where I think it's almost like kind of cathartic when there's no practical disadvantage to confessing to further murders, where the serial killers have done it when they've been like, well, I might as well confess. Well,
like Ted Bundy did that. Like just before he was executed, he confessed to like a fuck ton of murders. And they were like, Jesus Christ, this man was busy.
It's amazing, but there's something about, I guess it's a kind of perfect storm of events that allowed this guy Samuel Little to kind of carry on as long as he did. Obviously, there was the trials that he had against him that didn't work, or that he was found that he was acquitted against early on. Whereas if he'd been obviously in jail, he wouldn't be able to commit so many more. There was the fact that he preyed on prostitutes and drug addicts. So oftentimes with like no family and no care. And obviously he was travelling around as well, so that helped him. But what was really interesting is that I read one of the news articles was saying how the reason he got away was because a lot of them were not marked down as murder. So a lot of the they weren't recorded as killings. They were recorded as like accidental deaths or like drug overdoses, because he wasn't like stabbing or shooting them. But I mean, he was still stunning and strangling them. So surely any kind of, even a rudimentary autopsy would surely go, well, no, this person's been strangled to death. Or not.
Yeah, totally. There's giant hand marks around his neck. Like, obviously.
There's hand marks. Yeah, there's hand marks on her necks and semen in her face. Do you know what I mean? It's like, of course she's been. So, but that's obviously indicative of the level of resource that is put on, looking at deaths of say prostitutes or drug addicts. It's very indicative of how the value of life is kind of class related in the US, because even like I say, a really rudimentary autopsy would say, well, this person was punched in the face and strangled to death. You could tell that. I think you'd be able to tell that fairly promptly. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not.
You would. I think like you'd notice how sticky her jumper was.
Oh, for fuck's sake! But you have bruising. And stuff on your
because
neck,
you have bruising on your neck and like where you've been punched as well. Because like bruising heals when you're alive, but when you're dead, it stays on your body. So it's very easy to see the bruising. And like I think if you're like throttling someone to death, is fairly violent, because like there are things like blood vessels pop and stuff, I think, in your eyeballs.
Yeah. I find it unbelievable that they could assign some of them. I mean, you think surely maybe they've not even had autopsies done on them. Maybe they're just like going, oh, that's probably an overdose, just chuck it.
Yeah.
And they would have no family to follow up a lot of the time, or they would be like estranged from their family. So it's this kind of like confluence of circumstance that allowed it to go on for so long, but it's pretty brutal. And it's a kind of, I think it's probably a lot of like the classic elements of what happens to make a serial killer. But the boxing is, I think, probably an enabling part, but maybe not actually that pivotal to it.
No.
That was my take on it. Did you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think the boxing maybe helped him with his attacking of his victims, but in no way was it instrumental in the case. Like, it wasn't like he got some sort of brain trauma that then led him to become a killer or something, or like the training from a young age then led him to become a killer. It's more actually his like own personal circumstances that have created this perfect storm that led him to become a serial killer, and is like kind of Oedipus complex with his mother and stuff.
I agree. So boxing on this particular occasion is off the hook, but there are certainly, I'm sure you did as well, and I did, look and come across some examples of where the nature of the person or their role as a boxer played a much more kind of central role in them becoming maybe not a serial killer, but certainly a killer. Absolutely.
So I think the first one like I'd probably like to speak about is a guy named Edwin Valero, who was 27-0. He was a Venezuelan flyweight. He came from an extremely violent and impoverished upbringing, but took up boxing and kind of found his feet with it. His career was beginning to flourish. He was starting to get some fights in the States. Unfortunately, he went for a medical for a boxing license in New York, and an MRI revealed a spot on his brain that could have been signs of a cerebral hemorrhage. And this was attributed to a motorcycle crash a couple of years earlier where he wasn't wearing a helmet, of course. And after not being able to get the license in New York, it ultimately led to no state would sanction him at all. And he was signed with Golden Boy, actually.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And so he kind of found this position where he couldn't fight in the United States. So he had to he ended up fighting fighting all over the world, like in Panama and like Thailand and stuff, mainly South America. But he ultimately then became a world champion. It was very interesting that people said that there was an argument that the spot on his brain caused quite an erratic personality.
This is like the CTE stuff.
Yeah,
this is like what we spoke
absolutely.
about before.
He was very changeable. 1 minute he could be absolutely normal, the next like a total violent psychopath. Someone commented though that after he won the title, they never saw him smile, and then something within Valero's personality changed and grew, but not for the better. And this kind of angst was pushed towards his very young wife. And he ultimately left her pretty much under lock and key. He had extreme jealousy issues. And I want you to think about this insecurities, because I'll come on to this bit later in the episode. So he was widely suspected of beating his wife regularly. So much so, he was assigned a police escort. Right? But on April 17th, 2010, he somehow managed to give them the slip and rented a van in which he drove his wife to the city of Valencia, where that night the two of them checked into a hotel room. At 5:30 the following morning, Valero walked barefoot to the front desk and calmly announced that he'd killed his wife. She'd been stabbed to death.
Fuck.
Right? He then offered no resistance when arrested, right? They thought maybe he was drunk or high or something. but they didn't think he was a suicide risk when he sobered up. So they removed his shoelaces and jacket, but he was allowed to keep his sweatpants. And then he used those sweatpants to hang himself. And he was 28.
Clearly, like, insane.
Clearly insane. So, like, I think there's a number of things with this guy that probably created a perfect storm for him to become a murderer. And we can get onto some of the kind of childhood issues later, but like, this violent childhood, impoverished background, almost like conditioned where violence led to success. Levels of insecurities that he kind of assigned towards his wife, this brain injury that led to a changeable personality, and then, this perfect storm, boom. Because like when he killed her, he was world champion.
Makes no sense.
It's so mad, isn't it?
Yeah, that's mental. It's absolutely mental. You do think that, because obviously there's lots of evidence to say that there can be physically things can happen in your brain which then have profound impacts on your behaviours. And whether or not that's part of, there was something maybe there already, but then like the change or whatever happened actually had caused the change to come about with catastrophic circumstances.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy actually, and very, very sad. And there's also a bit to say. Well, why is no one trying to manage him or be like, look, he's not the same as he was. He was always a bit crackers, but now he's like proper crackers. He's beaten his wife so much, like, we need to step in. He was accused of like beating his wife and his mother in the same night and stuff. Like he'd recently been arrested for domestic assault on his wife.
I think more than anything else, the kind of the boxer type or the boxer cliche is it's domestic abuse. This is just seems to be so prevalent in like current day and also like latter day boxing that there's such a proportion of them that are domestic abusers.
Yeah,
and that seems to be the most common thing is that their way of that they for some reason that's like the overspill from fights. It's to do with how they whatever their way of communicating somehow is to use their fists, and the person that seems to be the most common recipient of it is their whichever partner they have at the time, and it's so common. There are so many stories of it compared to other sports. I mean, I don't know how you need to run an analysis, some stats and things, but I mean, there's so many instances of it. There are so many boxers you could look at just now, high profile boxers who have in occasions of domestic abuse, and it seems to be sometimes these really like wild stories where it's kind of like escalation from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, because it's not been put in check at any point, it escalates and escalates until someone dies.
Carrying on from that theme, the Argentinian boxer Carlos Monzon, who is widely regarded as one of the best middleweight boxers of all time, like a sensational boxer who could do everything, but was like serial domestic abuser, and kind of he had partners and then he changed his partners, etc. But despite being revered in Argentina, kind of a national treasure, he ended up by his wife. He had a wife who's a model and an actress, and he would regularly beat her. And apparently he also used to beat paparazzi, like quite frequently beat paparazzi. And it seemed to be never like went to jail for it or anything, but it was just he was known to beat them up, which is astonishing, really. But anyway, his final partner, he used to beat regularly, and then they had an altercation which ended up with him strangling her and throwing her off a balcony.
Fuck.
And then this is the best part, he jumped off after her. So he threw her off and then jumped off himself. She died, and he didn't die. He injured his shoulder. And then he went to prison. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. But because, I don't know if it was the sentencing or the approach that was taken to his prison stint was to do with how revered he was, but he was given like weekend leave so he could go home and stuff at the weekends. And on his way back to prison from a home visit, he flipped his car and killed himself.
Christ.
And then he had a sort of hero's funeral in Argentina, and everyone sang the song, apparently a song with the lyrics "Go Champ" at his funeral.
I think the most incredible thing about it is you kill your wife, right? But yet, like, you're still lauded as some sort of hero at the end of it. Like, what the fuck, man? You know?
It's amazing. I found, I'll put it up a link to it on the Facebook, but there was quite an interesting article. I think it was in advance of the Broner Pacquiao Broner card, but it was basically saying about the problem within boxing regarding domestic abuse and how the boxers are almost like celebrated for being kind of like dark and edgy and being like a bad man. You know, that's kind of like how they're supposed to, and it's like when that spills over into real life, there's not the same level of scrutiny applied to them that's applied to people in any other sports who would be, you know, ostracized for that kind of behavior. Boxers, it's sort of not, if not encouraged, then certainly condoned. So you had who we've not spoken about too much, Marcus Brown on the undercard of that fight versus Badu Jack. Marcus Brown's like a serial domestic abuser. I think he's just appeared in court for like the third time related to domestic abuse charges. And then you had boxing's biggest idiot, Adrian Broner, at the top of the bill, who's had domestic abuse charges among a raft of other ones. So, you know, you two celebrated guys on the same card who are doing it and who are pretty unrepentant about their actions as well.
Yeah, and so, you know, you would think that they're, you know, they would start to get dropped by sponsors, but that doesn't seem to happen in boxing.
Imagine, I don't know if they're even still going out. Imagine like Nicole Scherzinger started walking around with her face panned in from Lewis Hamilton. Like he would just be out. Can you imagine?
Man. Oh, just no chance, man. Absolutely no chance.
It would be chow, you're done. No one wants to know you're out of sport. You know, there would be no way, there would be no recovery from it. But boxers do the equivalent, and it's like it's just like it's nothing. It brings like minimal criticism. It's staggering.
Yeah, it is. You know, I think that, you know, one of the problems is that maybe, you know, the sport hasn't broken through enough where there's enough casual fans for people to have outrage, and there's maybe still this kind of, you know, old boy mentality that still exists that hasn't quite changed enough yet, because it's a relatively mainstream sport. However, you know, it's not as mainstream as you know, football, or, you know, like American football in the States, nothing's that big, you know, or basketball. However, I mean, basketballers are pretty bad for doing domestic assault and rape and stuff as well. Like all that stuff with Kobe Bryant, like having sex with young children, and like, you know, nothing really came from it.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I looked up one of the things on Wikipedia, and it was like criminality in sports, and it had a list of all the people that had been convicted of criminal offences across the different sports, and like boxing has like a sizable chunk, and it has like a good couple of murders, obviously as well included in that. The most kind of grievous in terms of their entries, bodybuilding has only 3 entries in the sportsman crime section, right? And they're all murder.
Seriously?
So, yeah, 3 entries. And I don't know if that's because of minor stuff that doesn't get reported or whatever, but no, bodybuilders, 3 entries, all 3 are murders of various sorts. But like you said, basketball, American football, baseball, and I thought maybe slightly surprisingly, motorsport all have loads of criminality. They were the most. The award for the softest sport, I think, is horse racing, which has 4 entries only, and they're all only related to like race fixing or dodgy bets or tax evasion. There are no violent crimes in horse. That's all because they're 4 feet tall. Probably they're like, I can't batter anyone. I'm 4 feet tall. My wife beats me up regularly.
Fucking hell.
But boxing had a pretty sizable chunk.
Well, I've got a really interesting one that I came across, right, and this is allegedly, right. But I came across Freddie Mills, who was a light heavyweight champion. His record stands at 77, 18, and 6. So, the boy had been around the block, but his troubles mainly came after retirement. So he was like proper sweetheart in Britain. You know, he did TV and all sorts of stuff. He was friends with celebrities and also the Cray twins.
Right.
But it seems that he took some terrible secrets to the grave, right? Now, he was found dead in 1965, and it was ruled a suicide. After he died, many theories sprung up about his death. That he was like killed by Chinese gangsters who wanted his club. There was also theories that he was sexually involved with Ronnie Cray. But someone researching a book on the kind of London underworld during the time of the Crays came across some evidence that claimed that he was a vicious serial killer responsible for the brutal deaths of at least 8 young women whose naked bodies were found in and around the Thames between 1959 and 1965. All the victims were prostitutes and died when their killer, dubbed Jack the Stripper, strangled or choked them during sex. But the killer's never been identified, and the case remains unsolved. However, so in 2001, this reformed gangster, Jimmy Tibbet Jr., said that during the research for his book, he'd uncovered information that suggested that Freddie Mills was responsible for the murders. He said he'd spoken to famous figures in the underworld and senior police officers in Scotland Yard, and he's convinced that Mills was the killer. Contrary to his squeaky clean public image, Mills was a sexually warped sadist who enjoyed inflicting pain. What a fucking tale, man, eh?
Intriguing, huh? Intriguing.
Totally. I came across that and I was like, fucking hell, man, that's intense. Like,
I've got one going back a little bit further for you to mention briefly.
Yeah.
While we're talking, this is not a suspicion. This is a clear cut occasion. There was a Canadian boxer by the name of Del Fantine who came to the UK to carry on his and progress his boxing career. Mm-hmm. He had a wife and I think children or child back in Canada, but he took a lover in London, and he was intensely jealous of his lover, you know, having any interaction with other men, and he caught his lover's partner on the phone to another man arranging a get together,
right?
And his response when he was drunk was to or potentially he was drunk, that was rumoured that he was to take a handgun and kill his lover, and he tried to kill her mother as well by shooting them. He thought he'd killed the mother, but he actually hadn't killed the mother. He didn't manage to kill her. She recovered. But his lover he did manage to kill. And for his crimes, he was hung outside of Wandsworth Prison in 1935.
Fucking hell, that is dark, man. Mm. That is dark.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
I did a little bit of research on what makes a killer. Okay? So, there is a lot of debate out there whether it's nature, nurture, what is it, right? But there is some things that people generally agree to. Okay, so one of the things is something called brutalization. And that's where you lose a sense of your own worth as an individual. So coming from tough backgrounds can cause this to happen. From poverty to riches, serial killers to gang members, behind almost every violent person, there's a story of despair, I read. And this was a really interesting quote. One thing that makes them so scary is their unconsciousness about that wounded child and the anger of that child and the fear of that child. And now, in a big body, they're doing things on behalf of that child without an awareness of it. Which I think probably, when we talk a lot about these like rough backgrounds, it ties very much into it, right? And there are some other kind of key points that could lead to people being killers. One of the top ones is aggression in the family. It says that many violent individuals have been witness to domestic abuse. So you might have seen domestic violence. You might have also been, beaten yourself as a child. And this then causes like deep-rooted anger. Also early life rejection or neglect. So when a child is abandoned, this can leave deep emotional scars that are difficult for him or her to reconcile. There are also things to do with attachment style. So, whether or not you had like a safe environment, you were cared for, you felt your needs were met. If those things didn't happen when you were growing up, you feel unsafe at all times. And then this was quite interesting as well, feelings of shame. So when children are neglected, physically or verbally abused, bullied, or exposed to prejudice and racism, they can often feel a deep sense of shame that they carry with them in their adult lives, which then causes them to act out violently. Now, if we think about this kind of perfect storm of things, and then we look at the backgrounds at some of these boxers, I mean, certainly Samuel Little, would have fallen into a lot of those categories.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so without having anybody to, without, addressing these issues and maybe not even thinking that they are issues, this bubbles up and then boils over into violence, which then like grows and grows and grows until you kill someone. And I guess also like if you come from a background where domestic violence and violence was almost normalized as a child, the way that you communicate anger...
It's less of a leap, isn't it?
Yeah. It's fucking deep this week,
It's
man.
really interesting.
It's really deep this week.
It's really. I think we're like skating on the edge of what we can reasonably discuss without sounding like we know nothing about what we're talking about. We're not psychologists, but anyway, we've done the research.
Yeah, we did a bit of research.
It's
interesting. It's a little bit different from what we usually do.
Just one more to talk about, which is not at all the sort of the typical, not like a serial killer, and not the sort of typical line in terms of the sort of progression, etc. But there's one person who I think, although he wasn't convicted of murder, he did kill someone. But I don't really know how I didn't know about this more than I did. But it was a boxer by the name of James Butler Jr. And this is pretty recent history. So he was a high-level he's not dead. He is a high-level super middleweight boxer, although he's not a boxer anymore. And he once competed but lost for the IBF title. I'll put the footage, or I'll put the link to the YouTube on the Facebook page, but I don't know if you ever saw this, but he had a fight it was an ESPN card that was a 9/11 fundraiser. Versus a fighter called Richard Grant, and he lost the fight by decision. So after the fight had concluded, the other boxer, the victorious boxer, Richard Grant, came over to do the sort of congratulatory, kind of commiseration, blah 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 hug before the announcement was made. at this point, James Butler Jr. had had his gloves taken off, and as Richard Grant walked towards him, he sucker punched him.
Fuck.
Right? Like, and I'm talking like proper sucker punch. So I watched the footage before we did the recording just to check, and you can see it. He lays the boy out. He dislocates his jaw, and the punch gave him a lacerated tongue, I assume because his teeth clamped down on it. So Grant needed 26 stitches to reattach his tongue or put his tongue back together. So this was the brutality. This was the warning sign. After that, he took a hammer to and torched the house of the person he was staying with, because they had asked him to move out. Mm-hmm. It was a friend who he'd known for 10 years, but they asked him to move out because they didn't like the way they were behaving. Yeah, and he killed them with a hammer and torched the house to try and hide the evidence. He pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and arson, and he's in prison. And what's really interesting about this is that the person he killed was Sam Kellerman, who is the brother of the boxing analyst, commentator, announcer in the States, Max Kellerman.
Fuck.
Yeah, I don't know how I didn't know this, to be honest. But yeah, Max Kellerman's brother was murdered by this professional kind of world-level boxer, James Butler Jr. Not murdered, but voluntary manslaughter, but essentially murdered. So, unbelievable.
Fucking hell.
That's a kind of different story, obviously. It's a kind of, I guess, rage. I think he said he had, was it bipolar? He made some reference in his defence to having a mental health problems. But just unbelievable.
That is pretty
I don't know how that's not like more talked about with Max Kellerman. But anyway, I'll put the footage so you can see the warning signs of when he sucker punches the guy, because it is like it's the worst after fight thing I've certainly seen in a boxing ring. It's just horrific.
Sounds it, man. Sounds pretty fucking rough. Like. Well, on that note, on that very cheery note, why don't we move on to what the F are the results from last week?
There was the pretty good card overnight from the States, which was headlined by Eleider Alvarez defending his title versus Sergei Kovalev, WBO light heavyweight title. Mm-hmm. And this was Kovalev's redemption. How much was left in the tank? Or was he going to get like spanked and knocked out of there again like he did in the previous fight? Or was he going to put on a better performance? And he did put on a better performance, and he won on points by a country mile. Yeah,
I mean, it was hands down. Like, Alvarez did not look at any point like he was going to win that fight by a long way. By a long way.
It seemed really, really, like, relatively early on in the fight, Alvarez's only chance was that he was going to have to knock him out because he was giving away rounds. Mm-hmm. And it was like, but I kept thinking through the middle part of the fight, he's going to just explode at some point, and he's gonna get Kovalev in trouble. He's gonna put on this incredibly powerful barrage and take it to him, and he never did. He just kind of like went out with a whimper. He looks, I don't know what happened. It seemed weird. It was like, it was all the sort of dangerous power that he had in the first fight he didn't seem to have, and then just to give up any chance of winning the fight other than by knockout seems really odd approach. But anyway, that's what he did.
Yeah,
didn't work. Kovalev back in the mix with the other boys in light heavyweight.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's got his own problems as well at the moment, which are interesting enough. But he's doing it in the ring, and you wonder, is he gonna kind of take the division now? Is he going to start kind of collecting straps?
But Terbiev's called him out. He wants that unification. Mm-hmm. I like my boy Bivol to take over that division. I'm going for Bivol as the best of the bunch. I think so. We'll see. But yeah, it was. I don't know. I was slightly disappointed. I wanted a bit more action in the fight. Although Kovalev put on a good show. I expected more from Alvarez. Anyway, it's good.
Richard Comey versus Isa Chaniev. I mean, Comey looks fucking good, dangerous, man. Dangerous. Absolutely dangerous.
He did.
He's got some physique on him as well. He's quick. He's exciting. It was a really good fight. It didn't last long,
Yeah.
but I mean, he looked real fucking dangerous.
But they're there to brawl, were they? They were both swinging. So I thought it was really good. I thought he looked like he carries some power. So there is a spanner in the works with this whole elaborate set of sequencing for him to fight Lomachenko and then for Lomachenko to fight blah 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 WBA mandatory, because Comey apparently injured his hand in the win. So there's a question mark about how long he'll need to recover. But they were trying to turn it around to the Loma fight really quickly, but obviously they can't do that if he's sporting an injury.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the thing is, he's dangerous. Like I think Loma's got his kind of speed, but obviously he's not a true lightweight. He's actually quite small for the weight.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's not a big puncher.
He's not a big puncher. Whereas this Comey guy looks like he's he can rock, he can bang. Like,
yeah, he does. He did look powerful. I thought he looked real powerful. So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, you still think Loma would be able to beat him pretty comfortably, but maybe you'd give him a chance. Don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oscar Valdez versus Carmine Tomasoni.
Yeah. Well, I think I said, I know I hate to do this, although I don't really, to say that the guy had a very padded record and he probably was going to get outgunned, and that's how it proved. He was very game though. Tomasoni. Valdez looked good, I thought.
Yeah.
He looked quite flashy, quite powerful.
Yeah.
He looked good, but against, I think, limited opposition.
Yeah. Magdaleno versus my boy Teofimo Lopez.
Your boy making waves.
Making so many waves, man.
Making so many. I thought he looked absolutely, first of all, in terms of his fight, I think he looks unbelievably good. I know people are saying, it's too soon to say or whatever. Magdaleno was live. He was a game opponent, and Lopez, the thing that I was impressed about was for 21, maybe it's like the arrogance of youth, but how calm he looks.
Yeah. Like, he he never looked like he was worried the entire fight. He just took it in his stride.
He never rushed his work, I didn't think. A lot of young fighters, they always say they need to learn not to rush their work or to fall in and stuff like that. I just thought his timing and his hand speed and his shot selection were all immaculate. I thought he looked like a super dangerous fighter.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where he goes next. Yeah. But he's and he's got obviously a bit of something about him. He's going to attract a lot of attention.
Yeah,
let's put it that
definitely.
way.
He's definitely sellable. Definitely.
Oh well, I mean, he's got his last two fights. His knockouts are career best knockout, highlight reel stuff. And he's got two. He's done two in a row.
It's immense.
And then he does the flash celebrations, and apparently it's a kind of a modified Fortnite dance, which I hear is a crazy computer game that all the kids are playing.
Delhi
all the kids
fucking alley every weekend. That prick doing something.
Yeah, is Drake not a bit old? How old's Drake?
I think he's about 50.
I've got a feeling he might be kind of our age or older.
He's at a hard paper round.
1986.
All right, so he's younger. He's younger.
33. He's younger than me. He's younger than me. I had a very easy paper round though, right? My paper round was a piece of piss. Anyway, I'll get on to it a little bit later, but Lopez, who most of the people in our poll thought was a bit bang out of order with his I heard it described as scooping, but I thought maybe one of the commentators, and this is more realistic, called it like a home run swing that he did in very close proximity to the stricken Magdaleno's head, which is it was poor form. Most of our listeners who voted in the poll thought so, and he's been kind of widely condemned for it. He says that the reason he did it was because Magdaleno was making very insulting comments regarding Lopez's Honduran heritage.
Right, okay.
So that's his reasoning for doing it after the 7th round KO.
Right, let's talk a little bit about the Sky card. Sergio Garcia versus Ted Cheeseman. Oh boy. Oh my boy. Cheeseman got absolutely fucking smoked, man. I just, you know what? When you see a comparison between someone like Teofimo Lopez, who doesn't rush his work at all, and then Ted Cheeseman, who had like one goal, which is like, I will walk forward with my skull and try and punch you. It was kind of brutal to watch. Like his nose was sideways by the end of the fight. Like it was really rough to watch at points. Like, you know, and he got tired near the end, and he was just standing there at points with his hands down, trying to just walk forward and getting punched in the face. However, that boy Sergio Garcia, like, I think he's pretty decent, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I would definitely like. It's not going to be the last we hear from Sergio Garcia. I think that he'll probably get a world title shot, actually, because he proved himself quite well. You know, but Cheeseman.
What is it with these? The kind of like heavily touted Sky prospects falling to bits?
You know,
it's becoming something of a trend, isn't it?
I know what you mean. I think some of it has to do with them being like fast tracked so that he can fill like stadium. You know, like I don't think this Cheeseman fight should have been like a headline act at the O2. I was surprised that it was, to be honest. Yeah, but like it all has to do with this kind of domestic round robin, right? So earlier on the card, there was a boxer called Scott Fitzgerald, right? And he is fighting Anthony Fowler on the 30th of March on the Liverpool Matchroom card. Now, the winner of that fight is going to go on to fight Cheeseman for the British super welterweight title. And so there's all this kind of domestic pomp that's going on to make that fight quite big. And I think the idea behind this was hopefully Cheeseman can beat Garcia, and then they make that a European super welterweight and British title fight. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. But now it'll just be a British one, and there'll be some, hopefully, there would be like redemption for Cheeseman.
Jake Paul, Craig Richards, Richard 1 and 3, quite comfortably, you know. Felix Cash versus Rashid Abelaji, first round KO for Cash. Good stuff. Now, I think we do need to talk a little bit. We need to have a word about Lawrence Accolie for a minute. So Lawrence Accolie and this guy Thomas Lodi. Oh my God. Lawrence Accolie has got the most awkward fighting style. So this was supposed to be like, and now he knocked this guy out in the third round. He had acres of reach over this guy Lodi, right? Like acres of reach. But I think if you threw him, Lawrence Accolie, up against a Bradis or, Usyk, you know, if he was still a cruiserweight, he would have the floor wiped with him. I don't know what they need to do. Either they need to bulk him up a little bit, also maybe teach him how to box, because he just doesn't seem to have anything. Like, he knocked this guy out, but I don't think that he would manage to fight like a Bradis or a Gassiev.
Well, those are like the best left in the division. I don't know. I know he's still kind of a bit earlier on in his career, but yeah, I know what you mean. He has this really, really ungainly look about him when he boxes. Yeah. I think he's 6'5", Ryan.
So fill the guy out a little bit. That's very tall for being a cruiserweight.
Well, I know. Well, I'd be curious to see what he weighs. Does he weigh in right on the limit? But I mean, he does look very awkward. He looks all gangly, and obviously he does all the holding and stuff a lot of the time. It's just,
they said
he's not pretty to watch.
He was Tyson Fury's sparring partner. He was one of Tyson Fury's sparring partners ahead of the Wilder fight. Really? Yeah, I guess for the size.
I think I remember seeing that actually. Yeah. Yeah, he's a big and like kind of rangy, I guess, same as Wilder, but I don't know, it's weird. Yeah, it's weird. He looks awkward.
Right, so let's have a quick chat and move on to our next section. What the F are the fights this weekend?
Yeah, so there's a card. As far as I can see, though, Ryan, the first thing to talk about is not on British TV anywhere. I can't find it. It's on Showtime in the States, but I can't see that it's being picked up by British TV anywhere. I did check yesterday. Gervonta Davis versus the stand-in Hugo Ruiz. It was supposed to be Abner Mares, but it's Hugo Ruiz for the WBA super featherweight title. Ruiz has been a world champion, but at super bantamweight. He's 5'10". He's a big man, but he's moving up in weight, and obviously Davis is very big and very, very powerful at the weight. I think he's got some crazy dehydration, rehydration stuff going on. So he's. I found some odds on this, and it's this weird American odds thing. I managed to translate it into like actual odds, but basically Davis is a 50-1 odd favorite to win this fight,
hell.
which is basically pointless.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a DAZN card: Alberto Machado versus Andrew Cancio on DAZN, as I said, for the WBA super featherweight belt. You've got Ray Vargas versus Franklin Manzanilla, I should say, for the WBA super bantamweight title. So on Sunday night, as in Sunday into Monday, you've also got Jose Ramirez versus Jose Zepeda for the WBC junior welterweight belt, and that's on Box Nation. Should be quite interesting.
Yeah,
actually.
good stuff. Right, well, let's move on to what the F went wrong last week.
I've got a bone to pick with you.
What's that?
Not for the first time. Not for the first time. What I've said during the recording, it's worth saying to the people that listen that most of what we record is the episode. We don't do like a lot. I know this is probably painfully obvious, but we don't do a huge amount of cut out. It's not like this isn't condensed from like 6 hours of chat. You know, it's basically we cut out the bits that are utter gibberish and leave the bits that are semi-gibberish in, right? But you left, I was like fumbling over for some reason, having a mental block about Bermain Stavern.
Yeah.
And I was jamming on about it, and I said, "Oh, can you cut that bit out, please?" And you didn't.
Do you know what? I was in a bit of a rush doing my editing, and usually I give it a full listen through, like to see if I've missed bits, because I've been like fucking about with other stuff, and I missed it. So I do apologize. I should have cut it out, but you know, I didn't think it sounded too bad. Got away with it.
Can you cut that bit where I got about Stavern, please? Oh yeah, that bit. Okay, cheers. The only other thing I had I've got a couple of other things. We talked about who's the highest ranked heavyweight who couldn't punch.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the era that we're now in, and really one of the things is like, if Fury comes away from this era as being the best fighter, then it'll be odd that he's, you know, an era-defining fighter, but one that can't punch.
Yeah.
So I was looking for heavyweights that can't punch on the list. This is probably not quite right, but when he was fighting as a heavyweight in his world title fights, Evander Holyfield had very, very few knockout wins. He was fighting against a good level of opposition, obviously, like world class, but he only had, I think, only a couple of his world title fights as a heavyweight were decided where he won by KO, and he had 9 contests that went the distance. So, and plus a few other like random ones like DQs or whatever, or stoppages for cuts, whatever. So he had a very like low knockout ratio as a heavyweight in kind of meaningful high level fights. He could bang, but he wasn't a concussive one punch person. So I don't know whether you can maybe put him in that somehow as being one of the all time greats who wasn't like a knockout merchant, certainly at heavyweight. But again, he was a cruiserweight moving up, and he was giving away a lot of size to the biggest guys. Interesting. We talked last week about reach, especially like Lennox Lewis in terms of his reach. Now we know reach is wingspan, so we know it's kind of pointless, or it could potentially be pointless. Because the reach of the arm would only be you're only at most considering half of that length, so you have to half the difference. Anyway, we said Lewis had freakishly long arms. So taking these measurements with a pinch of salt, Lewis's reach is 213.4 centimeters according to a page on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Versus Fury's is 216. So there's 2.5 centimeters between them. So if you think per arm, that's like a 1 centimeter reach advantage. So Lewis had freakishly long arms.
Yeah.
For his height because he was 6'5". The Klitschko brothers, Vitaly 203 and Vladimir 206 as points of comparison.
Right. Okay. That's incredible. That's incredible.
So Lewis had absolutely enormous. Lewis is 6'5". On a good, just as a point of reference, right, Ryan, you'll like this. On a good day, when I'm all stretchy, I'm 6'4".
Yeah.
At a push, just under. So Lewis is an inch taller than me. My reach, as I got my lovely wife to measure me this morning to check for this podcast research, my reach is 190 centimeters.
Really? You've quite...
Yeah. So
okay.
I think I'm like a Tyrannosaurus Rex man.
Hold on. I actually have a tape measure right here. Right? Hold on. I'll measure my reach right now.
Listen, if you say it's 190, I'm not going to believe you. Listeners, this is not set up. This was not planned.
This is not planned at all. But I was doing
they don't do this on 5 Live.
No, they don't. I was measuring out some stuff earlier, so I've actually got one handy.
What?
Right, hold on.
What were you measuring, Ryan? Are you sure it's not a ruler you had out?
No, that would be a magnifying glass. Hold on. Right. So what is it? Fingertip to fingertip.
I'm not quite sure how you're accurately going to do this with like yourself.
Well, I mean, we'll give it a rough bash, right? So,
you shouldn't do that. You'll hurt yourself.
Right. Okay. Here we go. Right. So. Right. So I have just measured out. Okay, my fingertip to fingertip at 164 centimeters.
Okay.
What was yours?
So, but mine was 190.
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah.
So the weird thing. So mine's 190, and Lewis, who's 1 inch taller than me, has a 23.5 centimeter reach advantage over me. So if you take me as like average, or maybe even I've got short arms, Lewis has freakishly long arms. Incredible. Like exceptionally long arms, but they all do, even accounting for them being a bit taller than me, they all have freakishly long arms.
That's wild.
But Lewis especially so, given his height.
Right. Well, that is very interesting.
So there we go.
That is very interesting. It's almost random news.
That was good. I like that bit. Random news. Andy and Ryan's wingspan
totally.
is short compared to heavyweight boxing champions.
Exactly. Cool. Right, so what else do we have? We've got to talk about some random news. You've got some random news for us?
I've got some random news for you, a little bit. BT Sport won the purse bid for Josh Warrington's mandatory defence versus Kid Galahad. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of chat on the old social media, Ryan. A lot of chat, people getting upset, saying that because BT won it, they were going to put it on as a pay-per-view, and Warren's come out and said, nah, it's not a pay-per-view. But apparently, the thing I read was that they paid it was like $100,000 or $200,000 more, but the bid was like $1.5 million they paid for that fight. Our favourite low weight division, lower than Lomachenko boxer Sursaket Sorarongvazai, who signed for Matchroom, will be fighting in a rematch against Juan Francisco Estrada in April. That will be one to watch. That should be a very, very, very good fight.
Yeah.
Usyk will make his heavyweight debut probably on the 18th of May, and it's probably going to be versus a heavyweight. But an unnamed heavyweight, as of yet.
I don't know, like Dominic Brazil, maybe.
Dominic Brazil. Well, that's who White wants.
I heard it. He did that at the end of the Sky card. He was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to fight AJ because we can't make that business happen. So we'll fight. I'm looking at maybe Dominic Brazil." It's like, for fuck's sake, man, scraping the fucking barrel.
Well, he wants to fight either Brazil. He says either the names in the hat are Brazil, Ortiz, or Povetkin. If he's got any sense and he's got any option, he should fight Brazil because there's a very good chance. I think there's a very reasonable chance that he would lose to Ortiz or Povetkin. He would certainly be not much more than a coin toss versus either of them. I wouldn't have said.
Callum Smith will be back in the ring in May. Apparently, they're looking to do a fight over in America.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, who knows? I mean, there's been chat about him fighting Triple G at super middleweight.
Yeah, I heard that. I also heard that Anfield were not being very accommodating in terms of potential costings for stadium use.
Really?
If they were going to tentatively look at it in the summer or something. I don't know. There was some rumor about it, but I don't know how true it is. Speaking of which, Canelo has reportedly vacated the regular WBA regular super middleweight belt. He's not going to defend it for now. But I mean, obviously he's got his fight against Jacobs coming up in which was confirmed for the T-Mobile Arena on Cinco de Mayo weekend, wasn't it? Fury versus Wilder apparently is almost done. They've been given an extra week past the due date to finalise T's and C's. I'm available, guys, if you need any guidance for it. I'm a very reasonable charges. And the last one, which I think you might like, Ryan.
What's that?
You'll like this, I think. Do you remember back in the day we had that crazy idea that what they could do if they were short of a venue in London was stage some of the boxing at Wimbledon Centre Court with a roof over if need be?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, UFC 234 is being held in Melbourne this weekend. Would you like to hazard a guess at which arena it's going to be held?
Oh, is it the one they do the Australian Open in?
Certainly is. It's at the Rod Laver Arena.
Fuck.
So they're doing the exact same thing. Although apparently it's technically the Rod Laver Arena is like a multi-purpose arena, and I know it's like hard court versus grass, but they're using what's mostly known as a tennis court, a tennis arena for a fighting sport. So it's not a million miles away. UFC in Australia, boxing at Wimbledon.
Fucking hell. Do you know what? Eddie Hearn needs to listen to this podcast because he'll be thanking us. So if anybody, you know what, listeners, tweet this to Eddie Hearn. Be like, Eddie, listen to these guys. They speak some fucking sense. You know,
they've got some real pearls in there.
yeah, like it's a shit charity shop, right? But there's some good shit in there.
Pick out your bits. Pick out the bits. And I think that's all about we've got for random news. Unless you have anything.
No, that's everything from me. So, Andy, do you want to tell me what grinds your gears this week?
You know what really grinds my gears?
I will do. I had a couple of things that I wanted to kind of choose between. One of the things I will mention, and I know this is becoming something of a habit, and I know we've just done an episode where we've delved into the deep-rooted psychological reasoning behind serial killers, which of course neither of us are expert in, right? But this isn't even my grind my gears, I'm just mentioning it. I listened to the 5 Live Boxing podcast, and Steve Bunce went on for, I don't know if you've listened to it this week, but he went on for 2 or 3 minutes at length as to exactly how the recovery process for Adonis Stevenson would go following his brain hemorrhage. And I wasn't aware that he was a qualified doctor.
He's a neurosurgeon,
I wasn't aware of his neuroscience background, where he exactly prescribed how the recovery process would go, given that he knows nothing about the specifics of this instance. But he spoke at length, eloquently, and from a position of complete authority about it, which I found beyond staggering. Anyway, that wasn't even my grind my gears. I just thought it wound me up a bit. What grinds my gears is, we talked a little bit, and it's obviously quite a hot topic, Teofimo Lopez's celebration after he won the fight at the weekend versus Magdaleno. And he got quite a lot of stick, obviously, for this disrespectful celebration. But it's that fight, but not what I want to talk about. What grinds my gears is the position that Magdaleno was put in terms of how long that fight went on for.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think there are four contributing factors that I could think about, and they all have to align, kind of like the serial killer stuff. There's got to be this alignment of this perfect storm of four factors for that to happen. So you have to have like a fairly like ruthless opponent who's gonna take no prisoners. Mm-hmm. You have to have a boxer in the ring who's too brave to know when they should quit. Mm-hmm. You have to have a passive referee, mm-hmm. and you have to have an incompetent corner. And all four of those things conspired in that fight for Magdaleno to be abused and to take an enormous amount of punishment beyond what was reasonable. Mm-hmm. So he should have stopped it, the corner should have stopped it, and the referee should have stopped it.
Yeah.
So, he's too brave for his own good. He's there to fight until they tell him not to. So the safeguards have to be there in terms of the referee has to know when to stop. I'm not talking about intercepting the fighter between the first and the second punches that knocked him down and stopped the fight. I'm not talking about that, which it was kind of like a Price Povetkin reimagined. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there was the hook dropped his hands, and then he got like a free swing at him. But before that, he was shipping loads and loads of abuse, and the referee had the option just to wave it off. He'd already been down a couple times. Just say like, there's nothing happening apart from him being punished. I need to step in and just stop this because he's not going to quit, and he's being pummeled. And the corner at that point just. His brother's watching it. Throw in a towel. Just grab a towel, throw it in and say, like, I don't care if you're mad at me afterwards. You were never winning that fight. And you were getting pulverized, like lasting damage pulverized. Like, there's no need for it. And the referee, I don't know, in his corner, they were just like hugely culpable in him being punished way beyond what was reasonable or necessary. It wasn't a world title fight. It was, it was a career up versus a career down fight. Just... He doesn't need that. And that's the sort of thing that could impact on the quality of his life after fighting. And it was completely unnecessary and completely preventable.
I totally agree.
So that wound me up a lot. And I thought it was a real, real shame that he was put in that position. So that's what winds me up this week. So Ryan, tell me, what grinds your gears?
You know what really grinds my gears?
I'll tell you what grinds my gears this week, Andy, right? And it's them trying to tell me that AJ Miller is fucking good, okay? Like, I'm really, really sorry, okay? But don't feed me shit and tell me it's caviar. Because that's what they're doing, right? They're trying to say how it's going to be historic for him to go and fight at fucking Madison Square Garden, blah, 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 blah. It's not even going to be in April now. They're looking at June, right?
Yeah, early June. Yeah.
They haven't finalized the deal. It sounds like it's as good as done. But, I mean, for fuck's sake, like, I'm really sorry, but I cannot get off on this fight. Like, I think, I'll probably watch it the next day. I'm certainly not buying it because it'll...
No, well, you wouldn't have to. It's on
DAZN. It's on DAZN, so it'll be a Sky card, so I'll record it. But, I mean, it just really doesn't excite me. And I think, actually, like, Dillian White would have excited me more because I know at least there's a bit of, like, animosity there and they maybe, like, knock lumps out of each other. But the thing that is interesting about that is that was never going to be able to be April because both of these guys are going to have to go through full camps. So why didn't they try and pull out way earlier than this? Mm-hmm. They must have known at the turn of January that if they hadn't had anyone signed, they were going to have to pull out. And I hope it teaches them a valuable fucking lesson that you can't go book in venues like a year in advance thinking that you're going to have a fight there. It just makes them all look really dumb. And like, I don't think that the Miller fight is a great fight. And I don't know how they're going to sell this.
I'm having to think about it. I agree with you I think it's a kind of bullshit fight. I think there's a lot of sort of business exposure reasons, and I think because Miller talks a good game and because he's got an unbeaten record, casual fans will think, oh well, there's a chance. But anyone that's watched any boxing, and I'm not proclaiming either me or you as experts, but we know enough to know that Miller is not he's not really very good. And we've talked about the lack of depth, and I'll be curious to see what the odds are. I would say Joshua will be somewhere between a 5 and a 10-1 favorite to win that fight. I would actually, yeah. So I've looked it up. You can get 5-1 on Miller, 1-6 on Joshua, and I think that's relatively generous to Miller.
Yeah.
I think he's got a less than 18% chance of victory. Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think he's got much of a chance. I think it's about convincing enough people. People in the States are going to watch it if it's free, or if they're just paying their subscription, they're going to watch it, and it introduces him to a big market, and it'll be a big performance. But it's not really about the fight, is it?
No.
I think it's about the occasion, because I think I agree with you. The fight really doesn't excite me, and I would have liked to have seen him fight White. I think I would have been much more interested. I think there's more of a chance of an upset, and it would be more competitive. I think Miller will just be there to be hit, and I don't think he's got any power. So I think it's going to be kind of boring, and one-sided.
Yeah.
And Miller's going to get pounded a fair bit, and then get stopped.
And what's going to happen then, right? After Anthony Joshua inevitably beats Jarrell Miller comfortably, everyone's going to go, oh, well, you see, he's padding his record, just taking another easy fight, because he can't take one of the big boys, blah, blah, blah. All that shit's going to come out. And I can't be arsed with it anymore. Because, to be honest, it all has to do with them fucking everybody waiting for Tyson Fury and Wilder to have their second fight so one of them can fight AJ. That's what we're all waiting for, basically. So, and neither of them are going to be able to do that business until we know the winner of their rematch. And fuck knows, what if it turns into a trilogy?
Well, I was just thinking that for me, the most likely outcome is that Fury will win that fight, and there'll be, because the first fight was a draw, so it won't have affected it. That there'll still be a rematch clause, won't there?
Yeah. I bet there will be.
So there will be if Wilder will put a rematch clause in. So you're gonna get Fury. It depends, obviously, if Wilder wins, but if Fury wins, then there's a rematch. So you're gonna have that fight whenever it's going to be, April, May or whatever, and then you're going to have another 6 months or whatever to the next one.
Exactly.
Potentially.
So I think
we're going to be at this all year.
I think we'll end up in a situation where AJ Joe Joyce will happen before AJ Wilder / Fury. In all honesty,
if Fury wins and there's a rematch, he'll have to fight. There's no one left. He'll have to fight White or Ortiz.
Fucking hell, man. It's a sad time.
There's no one else to fight. Fight.
Not at the moment, at least. You know what we need? We need another Olympics. We need an Olympics to happen. So you get a crop of fighters.
Super fast track, first fight. Do you want to fight Anthony Joshua? First fight, he's a professional.
This boy's a prospect. He just won silver at the Olympics.
Do you want to headline your first show? Yes. Where? Wembley versus
Wembley
Joshua.
Arena, April 13th. Oh, fucking hell. Cool. Well, with that, let's move on to a little bit of listener corner. I want to give a shout out to our boy Tony King, who left a really good recommendation and review on the Facebook page. So that is an option, guys. If you want to just do it on the Facebook page, do it on the Facebook page. And we really appreciate his little review. I thought it was fucking banging. So another thing that I'd really like you guys to do, right? And I have almost a certainty that none of you will do it, But when this episode goes up, like I'm almost certain no one will do it. So please try and like prove me wrong.
Prove him wrong. Prove Ryan wrong.
Hit the share button on our Facebook post when we put up the episode. Just share it. Or tag a mate in or something that you know might actually listen to it. Because this is a bit of a crossover episode anyway. So people might actually enjoy listening to it, you know, because it's not actually 100% about boxing. People like true crime and stuff, you know. Maybe even your granny will like it. Who knows?
The granny will definitely like
your granny will love it. But do that. That would be really helpful, just to help us kind of like get, you know, some more listeners. You know, because it's growing, but like you can help us grow faster. Yeah,
like a cancer.
Cancer slowly spreading.
Oh, dark.
Anyway.
Yeah, please like, share, and subscribe.
Like, share, and subscribe. So, with that, guys, it's goodbye from me, Ryan.
And goodbye from me, Andrew.